So, I don't know if anybody's looked around much, but have you noticed that people kind of seem to be angry a lot anymore? No one's shaking their head no, so I think we're doing okay. So, I launched off on a good point, so that's good. But, it's funny. It just seems that, every issue has become this kind of battle plan-like thing almost, right? That kind of every issue has two sides, my side and the wrong side. Right? And, politics is the obvious place for that, and as we have a midterm election coming up, these things start to amp up a bit. But it doesn't really stop there. It seems like it's kind of leaked over into everything, that every issue somehow feels like it's a life or death issue. Now, why is that the case? And lots of people put forward reasons that, some people will say that, well, it's the change in the way the news media covers things, that rather than relating information, it's much more about getting us all worked up, and maybe that's it. Lots of people blame social media. We know the algorithms are really designed to draw us towards content that upsets us because that's kind of better for their business. Other people will say 24-hour cable stations because you can be mad about something all day long now. It just kind of keeps coming at you. And I don't think we're going to solve the cause in the next 20 minutes, but I think there's something we can do with that. I think there's something we can do to make a difference in it. Because if we don't start to do something with it, we start to get drawn more deeply into it. And as we're drawn more deeply into it, something starts to happen to us. Because if we really see every issue as my side and the wrong side, the next step for that, for lack of a better term, we start to see every issue as a holy war, right? That somehow I decide that what I'm doing is the good side, I'm trying to achieve some good, and I'm just not going to let anybody stand in my way, and I will do whatever it takes. Because if I don't, who will? And that starts to fuel all of our thoughts about all kinds of things. But if we stop and we think about it, as exciting as that kind of language sounds when it's an issue that you feel good about, when it's an issue that maybe you don't, that is not as high on your list of priorities, not that it's unimportant to you, but it's not as important to you as it is to someone else, we start to realize that that kind of thinking is rarely, if ever, helpful. It's rarely, if ever, productive. Because that kind of thinking starts to look at everything, causes us to look at everything from the standpoint of a specific question. Does the end justify the means? And often we've answered yes to that question before we even get there. In other words, I believe that what I'm doing has so much potential for so much good that it doesn't matter who I hurt in the process. Kind of that idea that, you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. And I think that presents a bit of a danger. Because we feel like every issue that we step into, that we've got to fight our side like it is the most important issue. But again, if we pause for a moment, I think we kind of know better than that. I think we all kind of know that that's not really how we should do things. And if you're someone who's been in church for any length of time, you're very familiar with many things that Jesus would have said or the Apostle Paul would have said that tells us not to address things that way. And so as I was thinking about this issue this week, what I started thinking about is what Jesus said about turn the other cheek. Like, what does that mean, turn the other cheek? So what Jesus said here was that you have heard that it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. Even if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Now, Jesus references this eye for eye and tooth for tooth, and he's actually referencing something from the Old Testament. That is often interpreted as, well, eye for eye and tooth for tooth is, if you take something from me, I'm going to take something from you. If you hit me, I'm going to hit you. Now, that's not what it meant in its original context, but that's often how it's interpreted. So Jesus starts out by saying, I want to be really clear. That is not what you're supposed to be doing. So if we're not supposed to rise up to these harsh and extreme tactics to get things done because, darn it, things are important. Is Jesus saying that we should all just be absolute pacifists? Is he saying that if we experience opposition, we should just stand there and do nothing? If someone hits you, you just let them keep beating on you? If you try to do something good and somebody pushes back, do you go, well, I tried, and I just give up? I think we can be pretty sure that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that neither of those approaches are it. That we shouldn't be jumping in ready to fight all the time. At the same time, we shouldn't just stand there. What Jesus is putting forth is a solution that is different from both of those. But interestingly, it's actually a much more difficult solution to put together, but it's also something that can achieve more. So as we look at this issue today, what I wanted to do was take a quick couple minutes and have a video of a gentleman talking about this issue of turn the other cheek. So let's check that out.
I think a problem today actually is that there's a hyper stress on justice. Now, in saying that, I'm not saying one negative thing about justice in itself. Justice means to render to each his due. That's the classical definition. Justice is one of the 4 cardinal virtues, so it's one of the building blocks of the good life. So I'm completely in favor of justice. But if justice is not tempered by something like mercy or forgiveness or nonviolence, here's the danger. If we simply stress justice, then I'm placing, as it were, a sword in everyone's hand and saying you've all got a right to seek retribution against those who've harmed you. Hegel, the German philosopher, famously said that history is a slaughter bench. And it's true. You look at history, it's a constant story of warfare and one group against another and deep hatreds and prejudices. Well, if I look back at all of that awful history and say, well, okay, now I've got this big sword in my hand and I need retribution and justice, I'm not sure that's going to get us someplace good. I'm Bishop Robert Barron, one of the auxiliary bishops of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. I'm also founder of Word on Fire Catholic Ministries. I think Jesus' great public teaching is the teaching about turning the other cheek and the love of enemies. But I also think it's a very misunderstood teaching. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn and give them the other. Resist not evil. Do not answer violence with violence. That can sound like simple passivity in the presence of evil. Or in the presence of injustice, just let it go, just let it be. That's not what Jesus is teaching. Notice, please, he doesn't say, oh, run away, give in. Nor does he say, well, haul off and punch him back. No, turn the other cheek. In other words, stand your ground and signal back to him that you refuse to cooperate with the world he's living in. By turning the other cheek, you're saying, I'm not going to let you strike me that way again. So it's meant to be a bold and courageous standing of one's ground. That line I've always loved from Gandhi, an eye for an eye. Yes, making the whole world blind. That's what happens when you meet injustice with injustice. You meet violence with violence. But if you meet it in the way Jesus is recommending, you act as a kind of mirror to the violent person so as to bring about, ultimately, conversion. It's trying to put a wrench in the works of evil. How do you take a wrench and put it in the works of wickedness? But never in a way that destroys the evil person. It's meant to liberate. That's what people like Martin Luther King saw very clearly. Martin Luther King, a man of justice for sure, The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. He's a great prophet of justice. But I also say, thank God, King was also a Christian minister who knew the relevant chapters in Matthew's gospel that talk about nonviolence and forgiveness and love of enemies. Well, King took that teaching deeply within, and I think that's what gave him extraordinary power. He combined the concern for justice with a concern for nonviolence and forgiveness. How do you start walking this path? The simplest act of love. So love is not a feeling, love's an act of the will. To love, Aquinas says, is to will the good of the other. If I wake up and say, okay, the project today is to see how thoroughly I can love. From that perspective, the divine forgiveness and mercy can flow into the world. What does your life look like when you get that? Not just intellectually, but you get it at every level of your being. It looks like nonviolence. It looks like forgiveness. And so, savoring justice as a beautiful virtue, I want to make sure I temper it with mercy and with forgiveness, which don't undermine justice, but they go beyond justice.
So I love the way he frames the issue, because he talks about the importance of the issue and that we have to stay in it, right? That we don't run away, that we don't give up, that the things we are doing are important. But at the same time, we don't punch back. That, yes, what we're doing is important, but it's so important that instead we stand our ground, that we signal, and I love the way he says this, we signal that we won't cooperate with the world that person is living in. That what we have to recognize is that what we are called to do when we are doing things is to recognize that we've got to be focused on people. That yes, justice is absolutely important, and the things we do absolutely matter. But we've also got to remember ideas like mercy and forgiveness and nonviolence. We have to consider every action in terms of its effect on people. What does this do to people? And as we think about what we do, if there's some issue that you feel very drawn to and you want to step into that, of course you want to think about, well, how does my work on that issue impact the people I'm trying to help? Of course we do that, right? Well, if there's people who have trouble getting access to food, am I doing things to actually help them get access to food? Of course we consider those things. And then, we kind of look around and we find people who are supporting us in that effort. So, of course, we think about how our actions impact them, because we want our supporters to stay with us. But that Bishop Barron, the gentleman in the video, goes one step further and he says, but you've also got to think about how your actions impact those who oppose you. That we should take action that puts a wrench into the works of evil. We want to dissuade those sort of things, but never in a way that destroys the evil person. So again, we're separating what we do and what's going on that we may see as wrong from the people who are involved in it. That, as he puts it, our work should aim to save those people too, to move them in a better place, into what we believe is a better place, to help them find something better in the process. And this is something that really comes down to this idea of valuing people. But before we dig in any more on that valuing people, I did want to caution us a little bit about this idea of evil. As he talks about, putting a wrench into the work of evil, combating evil, dealing with the evil person. Evil is a word that is a dangerous word. It's a loaded word. Now, there are some things that go on that are absolute evil, that most of us would agree are absolute evil. I mean, Russia bombing civilian homes. Most of us would agree that that is evil, and that perpetrators of that are perpetrating evil. So in situations like that, yes, that's evil. But in this kind of hypersensitive world that we live in, we start to escalate all kinds of things to that level that maybe aren't quite as clear. That maybe we've got to be careful to not see every disagreement as war. I mean, think about it. Pick any contentious issue. I'm not even going to list any because you got plenty in your mind already. Right? Pick any contentious issue. And if you look at one side, the people on one side consider the other side evil. And by extension, when they see the other side as evil, they consider anyone on that side also as evil. Because in this hypersensitive world we seem to live in, we begin to see people as their position on an issue, as opposed to seeing an issue that has two sides and people on both sides. Whatever your position is, you're defined by that position. And what starts to happen? Okay, well, if I see that side of the issue as evil, and you support that side, you're evil. But see, me on the other hand, okay, my side of the issue is good. I support the good side. I'm good. And when I start to think like that, the next step is, you're evil, I'm not. So you know what I need to do? I need to make you be like me. Because that's going to fix everything. Because I'm going to draw everybody to the good because I see this as the good side, and I'm going to try to change you and make you good. Somehow, along the way, it seems that rather than recognizing that we step into an issue to bring about a solution, instead, we step into an issue to try to change other people, to try to pull everyone over to my side. Now, maybe that sounds good because I'm obviously right. I must be right, right? They give me the podium. I must be right. But of course, what's the issue then if the person on the other side is equally certain that they're right? And their attitude is the same as mine. I'm sitting here all day trying to change that person, and they're over there trying to change me. Again, I want to be clear, not trying to change my mind, but trying to change me. Well, before long, we have a stalemate because we are all absolutely convinced that I'm right and you're wrong, and that person is convinced that they are right and I am wrong. And we are both equally convinced that the solution is to make you like me. And I think that looks a lot like what we have going on around us now. And I think that leaves us stuck. Because somehow, we all start to see everyone else as the problem. And everyone else is the one who needs to change. The solution is to just make everyone else like me. And before long, we start to look like Jake Elwood Blues. I'm on a mission from God. Now, that's a really old movie, so if you don't get the reference, I'll fill you in. It turns out the movie's I didn't realize that movie's 42 years old. And I remember watching it, which really makes me nauseous, by the way. But it's a comedy, in case you don't know. These are the guys known as the Blues Brothers. But the movie is they are kind of ne'er-do-wells, get in trouble a lot. They become aware of an orphanage that has a financial need. And they're musicians. They're like, hey, we'll do a concert to raise money for the orphanage. But of course, the band is all broken up. So the movie is driving around trying to get the band together. But while they do that, they destroy lots of property, they break lots of laws, they're running from the police all the time. And every time they make a really bad decision, what they say is, it's okay. I'm on a mission from God. And it's funny when it's in a movie. It gets a lot less funny in real life. And unfortunately, I think that sort of thing happens a lot. And what it gets us in is a big mess. That it gets us in the big mess that we find ourselves in. Because this kind of thinking starts to drive us towards that, destroy your opponent at any cost. And I think it's become really clear if we look around that is clearly not a solution. So what is the solution? What do we do? If we know that us trying to change other people, or I might say us trying to transform other people to be like us is not the solution, then what is the solution? Well, I think the solution does involve being transformed. But it's not about us trying to change other people. What it is allowing God to transform us. It's about allowing God to transform us to be more like Jesus. To basically do just as the gentleman in the video described, to recognize that that love is the answer, which sounds so silly because it's an old song title, right? But the reality is that it's about love, but not the kind of, sit off by yourself and quiet in the corner kind of love, right? It's about action, but action that's driven by love. Love for one another. The kind of love that Jesus described, the kind of love that Jesus demonstrated. Because if we read through the accounts of Jesus in the gospel, he didn't just walk around saying, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. I mean, he did those things, but what else did he do? Someone had an issue he could deal with. He dealt with it. Someone had a problem. He helped them with it. He never got so caught up in issues. In fact, he largely seemed to avoid issues. But he invested in people. He showed up with people. He took care of people. He helped people. That's what we want to open ourselves up to allow God to transform us. Because if we think back to Jesus' time in his earthly ministry, as he was finishing up, after those who were following him had been following him for, we think, about 3 years, he gave them a command. He said, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another." In other words, do what you saw me do. When I saw someone who was hungry, I stepped in and I helped them eat. When I saw someone who was hurting, I stepped in and provided relief. That when someone was in deep, deep sorrow, we spent time with them. That he was not afraid to say, that person's pain is too messy for me. He stepped into that pain and he provided help and he provided support. And he did that fueled by love, not because someone was on one side of an issue or another. That he calmly dealt with people who had very different views of things. And he dealt with them the same. Always in love, but always with action. Now, that is an incredibly high bar. To have a love where we focus on meeting people's needs, where we try to bring positive change into the world, but not allowing ourselves to be defined by our issues. That we have a stance on an issue and we should certainly work towards things we think are important, but we don't want to be defined by our issues and we don't want to define others by their position on an issue because our top priority is love. So again, that means that it does not mean that we do a half-hearted effort, right? That when we believe something is important, we give our whole selves to it. We give our time, we give our money, we give our abilities. We actually are unafraid to invest emotional capital in someone. We use all of the abilities we have to try to bring about the solution that we feel called towards, to try to lift people up, to try to make a difference, to help those that are hurting. But we never see the people on the other side as our enemies. They never see them as something to be destroyed. That I'm saying that what we should do is when we feel called to an issue, give it our 100% all, including our emotional state. And if someone opposes you and you have to work through an issue, you're willing to work through that issue, but you never see that person as the enemy. So, as I described that, I mean, can you imagine that? Can you imagine throwing your everything into trying to change something, and then someone steps in and messes it up on you because they believe that what you're doing is on the wrong side of the issue? And then I say you're supposed to keep loving them. You might say that I'm asking too much, that, you know what, I want to be open-minded, I want to be loving towards people, but that's asking too much. I just can't do that. Well, neither can I on my own. That few of us can on our own. But this is where the transformation comes in. This is where allowing God to transform us comes in. Because when we lean fully into helping people, that when you say, this issue is important, I'm going to do all I can to support it, and we invest so much of ourselves into it, pushing past our comfort zone, saying that I'm not comfortable doing this. It's past an ability I believe I have, but I'm going to try anyway. We try doing all that while loving and valuing people, even those who oppose us. The only way to get through that, at least the only way I know to get through that, is that I have to lean into God. I have to reach out to God and say, I feel this is the direction you're calling me in, but I'm having a hard time loving this person right now. God, I need you to tell me what to do. I need you to tell me the next step. I don't know where the pieces are going to come together. I need this. I just need you to tell me what to do. And as we do that, we start to grow closer to God. Because one of the things that happens in that process, that particularly when a person that opposes you is pushing back, what I actually have to do, this is the truth. I reach out to God and I'm like, God, I need you to help me see them like you see them, because I don't right now. I need you to help me see them with the same love you have for them. And I may ask that for weeks. There are people I've asked that for months. God, I'm just having a tough time with this. I need you to show me how to do that. And that process changes us. That prioritizing love for people changes us. That connection to God of saying, I can't get through this without you, changes us. And what happens is that Jesus-like love becomes a deeper part of who we are. And we find ourselves valuing people above all else. And another thing starts to happen. We stop trying to find our personal value in our causes. I mean, if we all stop for a second and we think, and when we kind of heavily invest ourselves in a cause, maybe over-invest ourselves in a cause sometimes, how often is that driven by trying to find personal value in the cause? The cause is good, but that's not where your value comes from. What we want to see and what we want to understand is that our true value comes because you are a loved child of God. You are loved exactly as you are. As I said during the prayer earlier, God's not waiting for you to be some different person in the future to start loving you. God loves you as you are right now, exactly the way you do things right now. Now, he may have hopes for us to grow over time, but none of that has anything to do with how much he loves us. That love is unconditional because your love is intrinsic. It's automatic. It's part of who you are. You are loved by God because of who you are. And then if in the midst of working on things and trying to achieve things, we start to share that same sense of value with others. And we start to love others in that same way, doing our best to fully love them with all our hearts. Well, we become our instruments of transformation, not because we are trying to change them, but because we've let God's love for us transform us. And as we share that with other people and demonstrate that love with them, that starts to share that transformation. Because Jesus actually tells us that what will happen when we love one another like this, when we love one another as Jesus loved us, he said, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. As we go through our lives, and throughout our lives we see a great deal of injustice. And when we find an issue that's big enough to us to decide to invest ourselves in it, there is a natural temptation to choose one of two sides. to jump in and fight, which, if I'm honest, is my natural inclination, or to just kind of stand on the side and just kind of lovingly hope for change. Neither one of those are the answer. The third option is the one that Jesus describes here, right? That we should be fully engaged, actively working to make a difference in lives, but embracing the love that God has for us and sharing that love. Because here's what happens is that as we allow God to change us and transform us, and we take real action to right something we see as a wrong, and we start to see the difference it makes in other people's lives, and when we love them without condition. I mean, just as an aside, before I came to this church, what I did was I did ministry with drug addicts in prison. And in that process, you see people who get out and come back. Get out and come back. And I had a choice. I had a choice to judge them and blame them for their return, or to recognize that God didn't do that to me and do my best to share that love with that person. And as I start to do that more, because that's just what I see. The more I did that, or at least the more I tried to do that, the more I saw God's love for me. And so we can start to be transformed ourselves. We can start to transform the people we're trying to help, not because we're trying to change them, but because we're loving them the way that God loves us. And then, sometimes, by dealing with an issue that way, it even transforms those who oppose us. Because we didn't take the easy path, that we didn't bail out, but we also didn't punch them in the face. Right? But we stayed in it and acted with love all the way through it. This is the invitation that is extended to every one of us.